have Monojit. Monojit Choudhury is a principal applied scientist at Microsoft Turing. And previously, he was a principal researcher at Microsoft Research Lab India. His research interests span various aspects of natural language processing and cognitive sciences, including NLP for low resource and endangered languages, language use in social media, ethics of NLP, and AI, artificial intelligence, and NLP. So one fun fact about Monojit is that he passionately drives the Linguistic Olympiad in India and Asia Pacific region, which is a program for introducing high school children to the rich diversity and heritage of languages around the world. He's going to talk more about that today in his talk. And so over to you, Monojit.
Am I audible? Yeah, sounds like it. So thanks to the organizers, Georgit, especially for not only inviting me, but also doing such an event. This is like one of the most different kind of thing that I have ever attended in my life. So I will only praise you. Gaali nahi denge kisi ko yahan pe hum. But the thing is, like I work on languages, and right now for the last 1 year, I have been working mostly on ChatGPT and GPT-4 and putting it in search engines and stuff like that. It was a very refreshing experience to not hear about those things much in this conference, because everywhere I go, people start with ChatGPT and end with ChatGPT. Yeah, but there is a lot more things that we can do about language and technology. And I have been interested in many such questions, especially how, language is used in social media and in the real world, and how the two influence each other. So my talk will be mostly around that. I'll try to make a couple of points. There's a lot that can be said here. And in fact, if you look at the research world, there is a lot of work which linguists have done in how language is used in real world. There's not much in how it is used in social media. There's some work, but not much. So a lot can be said, but I will try to be brief and mention a couple of things which I think is interesting and we have looked into. So one of the things that I have been looking at for last 10 years when I was at Microsoft Research India is this issue of what we call Choudhury language. So mixing of language, and we do it all the time. The title of this talk is also mixed. So for people in India, it's quite obvious that this happens all the time. But it's not only in India, right? It happens across the world. If you, and linguists call this phenomenon code mixing or code switching, just a technical term. Code here means language. Now, it happens everywhere. Yet when we started working on it, that was around 10 years ago, it was, and that's a big team of people, a lot of collaborators from Microsoft Research, Microsoft Development, and other academic institutes. But we had a very hard time selling the work, because our white uncles told us that this is a peripheral phenomenon. If people can speak both English and Hindi, we will provide them technology in English. Why do you need to build technology which is mixed? It dramatically changed when they released Alexa in India. Even though people knew that Alexa can only understand English, nobody used English. People in India can't speak English. People in India can't speak Hindi. They can only speak English or Tamilish or Benglish, right? It's such a natural thing to mix. We don't even realize when we are switching language. Same for Microsoft. When we released Skype Translator, we had to, we saw that the language was mixed all the time. So in fact, nobody spoke only Spanish or only English. It was Spanglish all over. So therefore, there was a need, and we did a lot of work on technology. However, we also asked some, what I think are more interesting questions about, why people mix language, right? Is it like a random thing that I just switch between English and Hindi? Are there patterns there? And of course, linguists have studied it a lot, but many of these things are intuitive. In fact, yesterday, somebody, I think Aman, if he's there, he was asking a question, and he said, can I speak in Hindi? Because Hindi mein nahi bolenge to emotion nahi aata hai. That's exactly the point linguists are making, that for emphasis, for emotion, we switch language. We have a preferred language. Similarly, for different topics, we have different, kind of languages that we prefer. And of course, pun and humor and all. If you look at Bollywood, right, so many songs, why this cola very D, not from Bollywood, but yeah, why this cola very D is all code mixed. Then one of my favorite example, I mean, it's a very weird way of code mixing. Sari ke falsa, tujhe catch kiya re, chhod diya dil ya, match kiya re. So this kind of songs and all, which exploit code mixing for a fun, pun and humor kind of effect. So there are a lot of interesting ways and reasons for which we code mix. But the studies that linguists did were all on real world. And we asked this question that, can we do large scale quantitative study on social media to see, when people switch between different languages and why? So one of the study that, we tried various hypotheses. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I will tell you what we found. So we looked at around 830,000 tweets. They all came from English Hindi bilinguals. We confirmed that they knew both the languages. And we looked at a variety of things, signals. And one of the very strong signal that we found is, like in this graph, you can see. So when people swear, they switch to Hindi. So there are domains like sports has most swearing, by the way. If you look at domain-wise, tweets related to sports have most swearing. Movies somehow has more praising and less swearing, and so on. But irrespective of the domain, everywhere we see a lot of people switching to Hindi when they want to swear. Now there's this is what the paper says. In fact, the paper there was supposed to be another thing here which is not coming, but I'll tell you. So if you look at the emotion, the sentiment, again, there is a 10 times more propensity to switch to Hindi when there is a negative sentiment expressed. That's why we might praise you in English, but Gaali to Hindi mein denge. However, one interesting thing is, if you look at specifically tweets coming from women, we also did a gender study, the trend reverse. So women, first of all, swear much less than men, but even when they swear, they only swear in English and rarely in Hindi. The reason probably is, there are many reasons you can think about, but what linguists say is, if you swear in native words, native language, it has a much stronger impact. So probably women don't want to have that stronger impact in general. So they might, switch to English, a foreign language, which gives less impact when you are swearing. And there are other things, aspirational, sophisticated, and all those things also involved. Okay. So, these kind of studies show two interesting things. First is whatever conclusions we draw from analyzing posts in one language can be misleading. Now, why this is important is, if you look at, so I'm talking of, let's say, 2015, when automatic tools for processing Indian languages were still in their infancy. And I'm talking of Hindi here, not even like Konkani or Marathi, which are still actually in their infancy. So when you look at, majority of tweets from India are also in English. 70% of the tweets from India, I'm talking statistics from 2015. I don't know if it has changed recently, but majority of tweets are in English. So what people think is, well, exit poll karenge, we will only see tweets from in English, and we know how to analyze them, and we will see, what's the sentiment. But that will paint a very rosy picture, because Gaaliyan sab Hindi mein, and you would have missed all that. So that was one strong conclusion. The other thing is, this shows also how social media can be used as a test bed for doing linguistic studies at scale. Because linguists have been doing all these studies. I mean, in real world, it's very difficult to study. You can't go to 60,000 people and look at how they speak, collect data, and do these studies. In social media, you could do. But there's a caveat. The caveat is we don't know if social media appropriately represents real world when it comes to language use. And this is the second study I'm going to talk about. So we tried looking, and this does not include any Indian language, so 7 European language. By the way, Europe is also very multilingual. So a lot of code mixing happens in Europe. So we looked at 7 languages, and it turned out around 3.5% of the tweets that are there in these languages were code switched. Of course, most of the code switching was English plus another language, but we also saw French and Italian mixing and those kind of things happening. But what's interesting is when you plot this on the world's map and look at, what happens in different geographies. So I'll quickly explain these bigger pies that you can see. There's a white part missing. That white wedge, the width of that shows how much of code mixing is there in that country. And you will see it varies from very high, around 13% of the tweets from Istanbul, to very low mostly in the US. You see that the wedge is very narrow. Very little code mixing happening. So we thought, what's going on? So we looked at, whether those people were less multilingual. And it's not true. Actually, the multilingual, number of multilingual people in US is one of the highest in the world. So why in US people are not mixing that often, whereas in countries like, in European countries, people are indeed mixing. In fact, what we found is the fraction of tweets in English is very strongly negatively correlated with code switch tweets. So if you're predominantly in a geography tweeting in English, you are less likely to code switch in this. Now, this is a very interesting social phenomenon going on. It looks like what's happening is English is the language of aspiration in most of these places, and even like, let's say in India. So when people come to US, they want to homogenize with the culture. They don't want to assert that I'm an Indian and I'm a Bengali speaker. They want to show I'm a person from US and therefore I tweet in English. Same for Mexicans. They don't mix Spanish as much in US as much they do in Mexico, for instance. So, somebody could hypothesize that there is a acculturization which is taking place much more quickly in US, or an aspiration to project a homogeneous identity with the group. Of course, we didn't go deeper into these things, which are very interesting questions for social scientists to, I think, dig into. But the signals are very strong. Yeah. So the interesting thing here is there is a three-way interaction between language, identity, and agency. Language, I think you all understand. Identity also is very easy to understand. I want to project an identity, stick to a particular identity, and that shows my language use. However, there is also an agency. The agency is actually, at the end of the day, I control how I speak. And I can change my language based on where I am, right? So many of you would have used different accents when you go and talk to different people. So there's a very beautiful linguistic theory, which also we studied in detail, in some detail, which is called the theory of accommodation. So when somebody comes to you and start talking, mixing between Hindi and English, understanding that you also understand Hindi, suppose you respond also in mixed English and Hindi, case one. And case two is you continue to respond only in English. Do you perceive a difference between the two? So the first one looks more warm. The second one looks more rude. So this is called language accommodation, or style accommodation. You are reflecting the style of the other person in your behavior. So there is a lot of agency also involved. And in social media, the third thing that comes into play is audience. So who are the audience whom you are targeting? And therefore you will choose your language accordingly. So there are very beautiful, Bollywood movies which explore this theme of language agency and identity, like in English or in Hindi medium, where English has a lot of aspirational value, but somebody might say, I don't want to learn still or speak in English still because my identity is in my language. So that's how, language is used in social media and how it's different, as well as how the real world aspirations influence it. I want to switch gear a little bit for the last couple of minutes and talk about something else, which is that there are around 6,000 languages in the world. Many countries in the world, including India, is extremely multilingual and diverse in terms of languages. In India, there are at least 300 languages, but depending on how you count, it can go to 500, and the number of dialects goes into thousands. Now, if you look at the current technology, and here I will bring back ChatGPT again, So all the things that's happening, there are a select few languages which I put in the group 5 here. So 5, both the axis here in the chart shows amount of resources. Higher it is, you can build better technology. So group 5 languages have the best technologies. But as you come down, and it's a logarithmic scale, so it's like dropping in several orders of magnitude as you come down. So group 0 has no technology. And group 0 has around 88% of the world's languages spoken by 1.2 billion people. So all the technological development are useless to them. And that has a strong consequence. I mean, of course, it has other social and economic consequences, but one strong consequence is these languages are going to get extinct soon. So according to some estimates, out of the 6,000 languages of the world, by the turn of the century, we will have half of them extinct. One language gets extinct every 2 weeks. That's the rapid rate, and technology is kind of helping that to happen. Technology and globalization has a very strong adverse effect on language extinction. So in 2019, UNESCO announced this decade of indigenous languages. So for the next 10 years, there are a lot of programs that being done to save these indigenous languages. And like Ravi, I also have a question for you on which note I want to end. The question is, what role can social media play in saving these indigenous languages? And I'll tell you at least one example. There's a language called Ojibwe, which is a Native American language, where there was a huge social media movement on tweeting in that language to, save that particular language and do a lot more, generate a lot more content in that language. In fact, Shobha was also telling the lack of content in Indian languages. So if we can do similar movements on social media on many of these minority languages, we can really do a lot of things. But maybe if we specifically look at India, Twitter is not the right platform. The platform where most people go to consume native language content is YouTube. So if we can create, I worked on language communities like Mundari, Gondi, which are minority languages, even though spoken by millions of people. And everywhere they say, oh, can you have stories, songs, video content in my language in YouTube? That's where I would love to see my language, more and more content in my language. Yeah. So collectively, can we think something to help these minority languages grow by creating more content? And influencers are all here. So can you influence? Thank you.